Hello and welcome to the Patron Saints of Pop Culture podcast. As always, I am your co-saint, Miguel Covarrubias.
And I am Kathy Covarrubias. And today let's talk about Black Mirror, Season 4, Episode 2, Arkangel. That's a mouthful.
That is a mouthful.
I almost forgot what I was talking about halfway through.
Spoiler warning for those of you who have not yet seen Season 4 of Black Mirror. It's all up on Netflix now. Go binge watch it and feel horrible about the state of the world for a few hours while you try to decompress everything that you watched in that.
Yep. There's a happy one in there.
One happy one in there. I mean, if you can consider Hang the DJ a happy one.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of the ending of USS Callister is happy, but...
In a weird way, I guess, but I don't know.
Yeah. Our review and summary of this episode. Summary of this episode is a parent, Marie, comes across some really tough times with her daughter, Sarah, and implants her with a thing that allows her to basically be the ultimate hover parent.
Ultimate. Yes. Helicopter parent. My summary is, Marie, who's the parent, has some traumatic things happen in regards to her daughter, Sarah. So she kind of tries to find a solution to help her parent, I guess, since she is a single parent, which involves implanting a device into her child. And then everything is hunky-dory until Sarah, who's the child, becomes a teenager, and then all hell breaks loose.
Okay. I want to say that I didn't like this episode, but I think it also did the job of what art is supposed to do, which is to get you talking or to get you to have an emotional response.
Yeah.
And I mean, I really feel like there were mistakes made on everyone's part throughout this entire episode.
Yes.
And so I think it's really, I mean, it gives us a lot to talk about, which is good because, we have to talk about stuff.
There's a lot to talk about. I mean, in terms of the parent's view, the child's view, the outside of the relationship looking in view, the fact that the pregnancy ending pill that they had is not a real thing.
Yes. Well, and I will give this an arbitrary voting system here. 7 Miguels out of 10.
Okay. I too give it 7 Miguels out of 10.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I did enjoy it. I do think that it did bring up a lot of conversations, especially for us who are parents who experience the type of thing that Marie has gone through and how terrifying that can be and how much we do want to protect our children. But then how far is too far? What's the right way to do it? And, that's great because that's the type of conversations that we should have to try to be better parents.
Well, speaking of being better parents, I really think that Marie kind of showed a lot of trauma throughout this entire episode.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, at the very beginning, you don't even know if she's lost her spouse or what happened to Sarah's father.
Mm-hmm. He was not there from the beginning, from the C-section.
And that's maybe a bad thing, it may be a good thing, but whatever led to that not being in the picture, there's got to be some trauma that happened in Marie's life, whether it be that she got, just kind of went to a sperm bank and had it, artificially inseminated, kind of thing, or whatever it may be that Marie went through some serious thought to get to where she is.
Yeah.
And to even, with the pregnancy and with things going wrong in the pregnancy, as we can really speak to, that really leads to a lot of being a helicopter parent, really wanting to be, just overprotective and hovering over your child at all times.
Yeah, which it's hard to not do.
Exactly. And I mean, there is also with the moments with her father, you can see that she has had a few other moments throughout her life where she went through some traumatic events.
Yeah, she felt like she didn't have control.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the major things that people don't realize as a parent is that it's a complete loss of control. You are not in control at any time whatsoever.
And to think that you are in complete control of another human being, even a pipsqueak human being, is ridiculous.
Speaking of which, our notebook in which we write our notes for the show is now somewhat gouged because of our son having one of those freak out moments. So.
Yeah, he's definitely a toddler now.
Well, and you also have Sarah, wandering off, following the cat in the playground, and I think this leads to that other big trauma for Marie is, where she's encountered all of these things, and you can tell that she's really kind of going through this whole PTSD through her own traumatic events in her life, and so trying to find the easiest way for her to feel the safest, and this is why this was the best option for her, was to go with this Arkangel program.
Yeah,
was for her to feel safe, and she didn't have anybody in her life that was really going to say no. This.
Her dad kind of did.
He kind of did, but he didn't push it.
No, well, because he essentially was like, I'm not the parent.
Yeah.
So he was like, this is my 2 cents, but I'm not the parent.
Yeah, it's not going to be helpful for this.
Yes.
And he said his piece.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is something that I think Marie's trauma kind of develops throughout this entire episode. And you see this in her, the way that she interacts with her world, and the way that she does things with her daughter, and especially when it comes to the whole crux of the entire episode, when she reboots the Arkangel. When it's because her daughter's missing, and she went through that traumatic event when her daughter was in that playground and wandered off after that cat, so she wants to have control again.
Yeah.
She wants to feel that control of her daughter in some way, and especially when they're teenagers. And I can speak to the ends of the earth about this because this is where my main basis of study is in youth ministry, and so I know about adolescent development. I know about adolescents and how interactions between adolescents and their parents go,
and how it's so important for them how they're going to communicate with the outside world too.
Exactly, and this is a thing that I think is very essential through this entire episode is the privacy, and this is something that I think we all can learn from, even if it's not having to do with social media or with computers or anything else like this. And I am one that my son is probably not going to have a device in his bedroom that we're going to not allow him to have that kind of privacy with it, primarily because of what I know can happen.
Yeah.
And what I know people can do to each other on the internet and with social media and with all of this other stuff that, yes, it's okay for him to have a little bit of privacy. It's okay for him to have that kind of stuff, but it's also not okay for him to do it where it will keep him up at night, or where he can go and do stuff when he knows that we're asleep or something else like that, that it would have to be in a public room. But sorry, backpedaling a little bit, I'm going to go off on a rabbit trail on that, but...
Well, and who knows what kind of technology is going to be out there when he's a teenager, so I'm sure our plans may shift depending on what's there.
But for instance, I can completely understand the whole idea behind the Arkangel of wanting to know exactly where your kid is.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking about that so much after the episode that I actually found out about these watches that you can buy your kids now, that have these GPS sensors, and they have also the smartphone technology in them, where they can call out to 3 numbers, which would be like our numbers and one of our work numbers or something.
Yeah.
And I think that's brilliant because it will show exactly where your kid is. You'll see that, they can call you in case of something and they need something, an emergency or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not going to be one of those like too invasive kind of privacy killing things like the Arkangel was. The Arkangel is like you can see through their eyes. You can listen to what they're listening to. You can, like, it's...
Censor what they see.
Yeah, that's a little bit too far, I think. And here's the paradox with privacy, is that in adolescence, they need their privacy. They need a place where they can grow on their own. And it's kind of like a plant. If you were to go outside and just completely fuss over a tree like all the time, like it would never grow, because it wouldn't have room to do that. It wouldn't have room to kind of, grow its roots, to develop its trunk, and to develop what it needs to throughout whatever is going on in the tree's life. It's kind of a bad two-way mirror in a sense as well, is that I'm thinking about like those two-way mirrors and like those case study rooms where they're watching all the participants.
And they're like, let's see how this little girl interacts with this teddy bear.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And as a parent, that's not the way you should conduct your study of your kid.
No.
And I think that, sorry, I'm going to get on my soapbox here because of, being a former youth minister. And this is like I said, my area of expertise is what I know, what I'm talking about. Is that I really think that privacy is essential to growing up as a teenager. But it's also a paradox in that you cannot give them too much privacy, because then they grow away from you. That you need to kind of have a place in their life, and also a place that's kind of a little bit distant to let go of them in a way.
Yeah, which is a tough balance.
It is a tough balance. And I mean, I remember my mom, like my sister had this diary, and my mom found it, would often kind of like read it. My sister just got like pissed whenever she did.
Oh yeah, my sisters too. My mom used to do that to my sisters.
And the thing is that she would find more and more ways to be secretive from my mom. And that's the problem with the paradox, is that the more that you intrude into your child's life like this, the more that they're going to pull away from you.
Yeah.
And I think this is something that Marie didn't get, and a lot of helicopter parents don't get, is that the more you intrude on a kid's life, the more they're going to pull away from you. And I think this is why Sarah ran off at the end of the episode.
Oh, yeah. Well, that, and she kind of killed her mom.
Yeah. Well, maybe. You didn't
maybe
see
have killed her mom. But...
Marie was actually dead, but
yeah.
Probably seriously brain damaged.
Probably.
So,
what was I going to say? I was going to bring up a point that, like, or helicopter parenting, like, or it could go the other way, to where the child is so dependent on you that as they become an adult, they have no idea how to adult. They just rely on you.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing, is that begins, very early on in life, is if your child has no other influences rather than you, then you really do become the control of their life. And this is, I think, we can equate to the evolution of dogs, is that if dogs were allowed to evolve outside of human interaction, they may have been a little bit smarter. They may have had a little bit more hunter instincts.
You mean wolves?
No, like wolves, like after we've domesticated them.
Oh, okay.
But then evolving outside of us.
Okay.
Yeah. Like wild dogs.
Okay. I was like, those already exist. They're wolves.
Well, yeah, and then stray dogs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's those years of evolution. You see that we've bred these things into dogs, and I think this is the same thing with children. Is if you're like there, like hovering over them every step of the way throughout their entire life, that's what they're going to expect, and that's they don't develop anything on their own. This is my whole tree metaphor coming back again. I'm using way too many metaphors here.
It's okay. I'm following along.
Is that if they're not allowed to develop things on their own, so they're stunted. Their growth is stunted. They have not used these muscles. They have not used these skills to develop on the outside world. And I think this is something that we, especially as parents who have mental illness, like myself with my PTSD and with my generalized anxiety disorder, that trying to find ways of giving my son tools to be able to cope with those disorders, even if he doesn't have them, but also to cope with things that might come up with that.
Yeah.
If he encounters something extremely traumatic or stressful in his life, that he knows how to calm himself down, how to dial himself back, how to, take the space for himself. Mm-hmm. And privacy is a big part of that.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's an introvert or an extrovert yet.
Who knows?
He just has a lot of energy.
At this point, he might be more of an extrovert just because every single person we pass, he's like, hi, hi, hi.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. And I think this is by far probably the parent's worst nightmare. Mm-hmm. On both ends. Your worst nightmare of a parent, but also the worst nightmare as a parent.
Yeah.
As well, is that when your kid doesn't have the right means to grow up, that they're not going to grow up. Mm-hmm. That you really have to let go of them in a way that allows them to grow. And here's something that I saw on a comic this past year, which I thought was brilliant. And I can't remember what the comic is called, but it was fantastic. It was playing on the whole footprints poem.
Yeah.
That's common in the
one where Jesus
Christian
was
realm.
carrying you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And instead it has Jesus saying that, that's where I carried you, and over there, that ditch, that's where I left you and went to go get a hot dog. And the artist wrote in his little notes section underneath that, he said, I once heard somebody equate it to like this, that God wasn't carrying you at that time, that those footprints were your own footprints. Instead, God was flying behind you and lifting you up in his shoulders when you needed it. And I think as a parent, that meant a lot to me because my son was just learning to walk at that time. And for me, letting go of Peter and letting him walk on his own was extremely difficult. Every time he fell down, I wanted to pick him up and make sure that he was okay. But I knew that if I did that, he wouldn't be able to walk.
Yeah.
And now, he falls down and I'm like, oh, you're okay. Get back up.
Yep.
So
it's like, just shake it off, kid. You're good. You're good.
He'll cry for a little bit and then he'll get back up and start walking again. So,
yep. I mean, he doesn't fall as much now. It's more like when he trips on things or steps on things.
But I think that's your worst nightmare as a parent is letting go and letting them do that. And I think it's knowing your boundaries takes a lot of communication between you and the child. Mm-hmm. And I think that communication really is key. It really does boil down to communication. And I better stop before I start taking over the entire show talking about this.
So, and we totally know that you can try your best to have as much of an open communication you can, with your child, but you can still come across the parenting nightmares. There's no way around it. I know that there's going to be something about our son that I'm going to learn about that I'm not going to agree with and I'm going to be upset about. However, I have done a little bit of research on maybe how to either prepare myself for those kind of conversations or how to keep the lines of communication open. So then if something like that does happen, he's not afraid to either tell me a little bit about it or is not afraid to hear my advice. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay. So I'm just going to read some few tips, both from the American Psychological Association and then also too from the Child Development Institute as well. They bring up a lot of normal things be an active listener. Obviously, you should always be an active listener to any conversation you're in, but yeah. I mean, that's just general, but I think that some of this stuff is good to bring up because it kind of shows you that you should talk to your child as if they're a person, not as if they're a dog. Yeah. And a lot of parents...
Going back to my dog metaphor.
Yeah. A lot of parents tend to, I guess, assert themselves in the conversation instead of letting their child try to have a conversation. Now, I know there's a certain point where they're just no, we're not going to argue about why you can't put your hand on the stove because you're not going to put your hand on the stove.
Yeah.
But in a lot of the other things were like, them, I don't know, wanting to go out for a weekend, but they didn't do their chores.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. Like, this would be helpful.
Well, and I think this is, finding those agreed upon boundaries things is that you need to communicate, and that's where these tips can come in, I'm sure.
Yeah. One of the things that sounds pretty obvious, but then like growing up, I can see why they would mention that this is important, is be available for your child. And this isn't just necessarily like, if you want to talk, I'm here, and just kind of let them decide, like just let them go. Like, this is also like, they bring up noticing times when your child is most likely to like talk. For example, for me, I am very talkative right before bed. If you, Miguel's like nodding his head.
I'm trying not to make it obvious on the podcast.
If like, especially when I'm like really tired, like I can talk about anything. I'll talk about everything. I will bring up something that I thought about like for 2 seconds earlier in the day, just because I feel like it's important to share. But like for me,
and then she'll jump topics like
a
million miles a minute
because I'm so tired.
And like, that's one of the things that like really just irks me. But we're not talking about our relationship right now.
And like, it's so funny because I'll notice he's like upset, and I'm just like, I'm sorry. Just one more thing. I'm sorry. Just one more thing. Like, their other example, obviously, at bedtime for me is one. They also suggest at dinner. Now, I know nowadays it's harder for people to have like dinner conversations. Growing up, we had most of the dinner time. We did have like a family dinner, but it was not the kind of communication that they're talking about. And then like in the car too, like they're trapped in the car.
Yeah,
they can't run away from you. So that might be another time. But then of course, like if your child like comes up to you and like clearly wants to tell you something or clearly wants to have a conversation with you, like pay attention, like put down the phone. Don't answer the phone. It's so funny. The Childhood Development Institute suggests to put down the newspaper. I'm like, when did you write this? Like, who reads the newspaper? But
in the 1950s.
I don't know, but put down the newspaper. And they also suggest, too, that, like, maybe find some time during the week, to have, like, a one-on-one activity. So not necessarily, I'm going to pencil you in to have a conversation. It's more like this is an activity that we do, like, once a week or maybe once every other week, and see what happens. See if a conversation comes up. I remember growing up, for me, we used to do game nights. I know that's still kind of popular in some families. So that, that's an idea.
Probably will be with ours.
Yes, probably. And then also initiate conversations by bringing up a topic that you just find interesting. Like, don't necessarily, like, ask them a question. Don't say, how was school today?
Yeah.
Because they're going to be like, good. And then that's it.
Yeah.
Instead, be like, hey, I learned about this today. Mm-hmm. And then, talk about why you find that interesting. And then invite them to invite them to ask a question or bring up their idea about it. Or maybe see if they learned something interesting that they want to share.
Well, and this is something that, I learned that I never really understood until I was a parent myself, but that parents will always see their child as the baby that they were. Mm-hmm. Like for me, he's almost 2 now, but I still see him as that tiny little newborn that, needs me to, do everything for him.
Yeah.
But he's not. He's almost 2. He can do a lot of stuff on his own now.
Climb on the table.
Oh, my goodness.
I know. That was terrifying. But anyway, but we also have to realize that now he's at the age to where he pretty much understands everything that we say. Yeah. He may not be able to say the things that we're saying, but he still knows what I'm saying when I say, stop coloring on the chair.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that, you got to stop seeing your child as just a baby, that You got to see them as the human being that they are.
Yeah.
And that they're going to develop their own thoughts. They're going to develop their own feelings and understandings of the world around them. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to necessarily be yours, which it can be a good and a bad thing.
Oh yeah, and that's actually another thing that they bring up too. Like if they bring up a topic that is hard to talk about, instead of like shouting them down or going like, you don't know anything, you're a child. Mm-hmm. Like maybe take a step back, cool off for a second, maybe think about what you're going to say. Don't be accusatory. Don't lecture them, but just say, hey, I want to talk about what you brought up.
Yeah.
And just kind of, start flowing into that and see if you can actually have like a back and forth conversation versus a lecture. Don't criticize them either. Obviously, don't threaten them and don't say hurtful things. I mean, that's on both of the websites. They clearly say don't call your child names, which I thought was a given, but apparently it's not.
No, considering some of the parents that I deal with on a daily basis now, that I'm not in a ministry position is really, it's unusual.
And something that they also bring up too is that realize that sometimes your child may test you by telling like a small part of what's bothering them, but then won't tell the rest of the story. You want to show them that you hurt them. So like, oh, you felt like this at school, like, sometimes I feel that way. That's another thing too. Like bring up that you feel that way too sometimes. And that is also a good way to show that emotions are natural, which I don't think ever happened in Arkangel because she blocked her
everything.
Grieving. Yeah. Anytime she was sad, anytime like her grandfather's funeral, everybody was blurry.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that you're not allowing her to grow on her own. You're not allowing her to see how other people deal with these traumas. That's not giving them the tools. That's taking them away from them. Yep. Saying, no, these are only for adults.
Yeah.
Which, no, it's not. Grieving tools are available for everybody because you need them. Life is difficult, even as a child.
And I can speak from experience on that part in terms of grieving because when I was younger, there was this a series of like quick family deaths that I was 4. I like knew those family members. I interacted with them, but I didn't really understand what it meant yet. But I still witnessed my family grieving. My mom still took me to the funerals. I witnessed them being put into the ground. And to be honest, I feel like it helped me deal with grief as an adult because I was able to see that, yes, it's okay to grieve and people grieve in different ways because I witnessed so many adults grieving in different ways at that time. And so when I experience death now, I find that I obviously grieve, but I don't take it nearly as hard as, say, like somebody experiencing it for the first time.
Yeah. We still have bad coping mechanisms like eating our feelings.
Yeah, and we kind of we kind of don't help each other on that.
Yeah.
There was another thing too that I saw that I wanted to bring up on one of the websites. When your child is younger, I think she did this, if I remember correctly in the episode, is that when she was talking to Sarah, like lowered down to her level and talked to her instead of like towering over her, just to kind of show that I'm an equal in this conversation with you. You are an equal to me. I want to hear what you want to say. And they also mentioned too, which is something that she did not do, is that when you learn something not so good about your child, it is important to bring up and have an actual conversation with, which she didn't. And to not ignore it and to come prepared. But make sure that you don't wait so long to where, like, the kid's going to be like, why didn't you bring this up, like, sooner? You know what I mean? So, for example, like, when her daughter was missing, and she, first of all, I would have just, as a parent, would have been like, oh, she's at this location. Okay, I know where she's at. I will just go there. Or I will send the police there. Or I will, something like that. But she went like the extra step too far, which is what put her down into the spiral.
Yeah.
But, so she essentially sees her daughter losing her virginity. And instead of, like, having a conversation, like, I realize we haven't had this conversation before, but we should, this is, you should practice, like, safe sex, like, this is what this means, that kind of stuff. She instead goes to the boyfriend and threatens him, which is not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And then she also, sneaks that pill into her daughter's food, which, again, is not good. Just don't, if you don't want your child to be sneaking around, you shouldn't be sneaking around your child.
No, it's a two-way street. Like I said, it's not that two-way mirror.
Yeah. But you should also bring up, like, hey, I see you doing this. Maybe we should talk about it. But don't be accusatory. Of course, like, I know that's so hard to do. It's so hard to do because us as adults, we know, hey, stupid, don't do drugs. Like, hey, stupid, you shouldn't be drinking and driving. But
don't text and drive. That's
no.
another moral from this one.
But we should really just, I don't know, remember what it was like to be a teenager, I guess. And I know that it's hard to do that sometimes. But I feel like that might be, like, because I can remember being a teenager. I remember some of the conversations that my mom had with me and how I reacted to those conversations in a very negative way because of the way the topics were, like, brought up to me. So I guess that's another advice. They didn't put that on the website, but I'm just throwing it out there. Kathy tip number 2, to try to imagine being in their shoes and maybe rethink about how you're going to present the conversation to them in a way that maybe is going to be more constructive versus critical of them.
Yeah.
Says a person who is only a parent of a 1.5-year-old. But
he's almost 2.
Yeah, well.
So the principles that we can take away from this parable of Black Mirror, Arkangel, definitely letting go. And I think ultimately, I think this comes down to a very small symbol in this episode, but I think it's a big one. Well, at least for me, was that she was told about a health supplement for her daughter. Mm-hmm. And she kept doing it. And her daughter was what, like a senior in high school or something? And that she was still doing that your child's systems are going to completely change at puberty. That almost everything changes at puberty. And like your brain starts to reconstruct like its wiring. Your body starts to reconstruct how
hormones.
Everything works, like hormones and all this other stuff. And so that's when you got to go back to the doctor and say, do I need to keep doing this? Is this something that is essential? And I think that's part of that letting go.
I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, and that's why it was a big symbol for me, was that she didn't let go. She didn't let go of this image of her daughter as a baby. She didn't let go of this image of her daughter running away to follow this cat. She didn't let go of these things, and I think it's all in that. And that's why I think that the pregnancy pill that she put into that smoothie, that health supplement smoothie that she made her every morning, that's why it was so important. Was that that symbol of I don't want my baby to have a baby thing, and that's completely out of the thinking of that she should be doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was just a small symbol that made it big for me of letting go. That you really need to let go of these things. You need to let your kid be a kid. And you need to let your teenager be a teenager. And you need to learn where those boundaries are. And that comes up to communication, is that you really need to have conversations with your kid.
And also, too, like with communication, every kid is different. So test things out. Like, if one way to try to bring up a conversation doesn't work, maybe rethink and try to bring it up again in a different way. Or Maybe talk about it at a different time. Like, don't just stick to one way if it clearly isn't working and they're not getting the point.
Exactly. And I think that this was something that I really, really wish parents would understand in youth ministry, was that they need to talk to their kids. There's some serious stuff going on, and they don't know what's going on with their kid because they don't talk to them.
Or they're in complete denial when they're being shown what's going on with their kid.
Exactly. And I think that's the problem with the helicopter parent, is that you've gotten too close, that you don't see the big picture. You don't see everything that's going on.
It's like, how can that be happening? Like, I monitor her social media. Well, good. Hey, news to you, Mom, but they can block you from seeing posts.
They can also
create new accounts.
Yeah. Which, another reason why poor Peter is not going to have a fun time being a teenager.
No, I remember as a teen, like, making up my own. No, I caught my little sister having a MySpace page. And I, like, told my mom.
MySpace.
Well, because it was back in the day when, like, predators are on MySpace. Like, get your kids off of MySpace. And, yeah. And so I was like, Mom, she's on MySpace.
Well, it's worse with Snapchat. And by the way, if you're a parent of a teenager, I really, really, really recommend finding Adam McLean's blog. He is from the Youth Ministry Cartel, is what they call themselves. And find his blog. He has been brought up several times by several big news agencies because of the pieces that he did on Snapchat. I really recommend those pieces and looking that up. He does a lot of those things on social media accounts and some of the trends that are going on with teenagers. He has a lot of great things to say about teenagers and the social economy of social media and all this other stuff that's really important for parents of teenagers to know. I really recommend that. I really recommend looking into his stuff, and especially why your teenager needs to delete Snapchat immediately. And so talk to him about that. He's got a lot to say about it, and he's got good stuff to say. So I really recommend finding Adam McLean, and he is not paying me to say this. He probably has no idea that I'm saying this whatsoever.
No.
But I've known him for a long time because he was a friend of mine from way back early youth ministry days for me. So.
Oh, and I should mention, too, back to communication. I know we keep going back and forth, but this is it, I promise. Last tip that both the APA and the Child Development Institute suggested to do was, when all else fails, if communication is clearly broken, seek professional help.
Yes.
Yes.
Just like we say on most other podcasts.
Yep.
If you need help, get help.
Yes. And by people who are accredited, please.
Yes.
Don't just go Aunt Sally is good with this kind of stuff without having Aunt Sally be, have a degree in it. Or
your pastors at your church or
yeah,
school
I was going to say that, but I thought I would let you say that.
Yeah, here's another sorry, one more thing and then we got to wrap up.
Okay, now who's one more thing? Just one more thing. Just one more thing.
Yeah. Well, this is all pertains to this episode, is that you shouldn't go to the church or to the school to have them teach your kid about important things like sex. That's all I have to say on that, is just talk to your kid about sex. Period. There's another principle from this parable.
Yes,
here.
Yes.
All right. So, with all that being said, let us close up now. Feedback schedule. We've got next. I know that we've said last week and a couple of weeks ago we had no idea what our schedule is going to be. We've actually mapped it out now because we've actually looked at what's coming out.
It's more official than last week, so please ignore those ones.
This next week we are going to be doing Coco. We will be purchasing that this week, and I'm excited because the protagonist's name is Miguel. The next week after that, we're going to be doing the Chronicles of Narnia, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We're going to be doing a combination thing with a friend of ours who is doing a blog, and he does a lot of kind of baking stuff from literary works.
It's much to do about Muffin.
Much to do about Muffin. So go check out his blog and that stuff. He's going to be doing Turkish Delights. We're going to be talking about Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The many iterations of Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
And I believe he has the recipes out there, too. So you can make Turkish Delights by listening to our podcast.
Exactly. Then finally we will get to Thor Ragnarok because that's when it comes out on the digital forms. So we'll be able to buy it or rent it that time.
Yes.
So if you have any feedback about today's episode or previous episodes, there's a lot that we didn't get to. And like I said, I can go on and on forever about adolescence and adolescent development. You can give us a call at 720-372-3879. You can also send us a text at that number. You can also send us an email at honestfaithconvos@gmail.com. I have completely redesigned our website for 2018, so you can go check that out, thehonestfaith.com. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, the like. And with all that being said, we invite you to come and join the conversation.
Bye.